because
well, again, to put it in perspective, you worked for Charles Brown,
right,
the chairman and CEO of
yeah,
AT&T.
right, yeah,
And I believe, in addition to being in charge of communications for the entire corporation, you also were assistant to the chairman,
yes,
were you?
yes, at that
So
time,
that brought about a very close working and personal
yes,
relationship.
yes.
Where were you and where was Charles Brown when that decision was handed down?
Well, the story goes like this, that it was not a surprise to me or to any of my colleagues in senior management, because what you do try to settle a case if you can. And so we had, so I knew that was being worked on. As a matter of fact, this was in the Reagan administration. We actually had achieved a handshake with the Carter administration, but when President Carter lost the election to Ronald Reagan, his guys said, you know, no last minute deals are going to go into the history book with our fingerprints on them.
Right.
So in any case, so it was not. I had actually done a plan for that earlier agreement with the Carter administration. So this was not a big surprise to me. But anyway, here's how the story unfolded. I was sitting at my desk in 195 Broadway, not the Palace on Madison Avenue, and Charles Brown called me on the intercom, as he frequently did, and said, "Can you come into my office?" It was right around the corner from his office. And so as I stepped out of my door, I ran into our Vice President and General Counsel, a man by the name of Howard Trenans, and it was evident we were both going to the same location. So we went into Charles Brown's office, and he said that, now by the way, this General Counsel obviously led the AT&T negotiations on the settlement, so it sure wasn't any surprise to him. But in any event, we go into Charles Brown's office, and he said, I'm ready to recommend to the board of directors that we make a settlement with the Justice Department, that this thing can go on for another 10 years. That's a lot of lawyer fees. And worse, in an antitrust case, when the government's trying to break up, we were no longer a 100% monopoly at that time, but we dominated the industry. You don't know what business you're in, or maybe in, 5 years down the road. And so, Charlie was aware of those kinds of considerations. We were running an annual construction budget of $25 billion. Wow. And how do you know what to invest in? Exactly. How do you know what to tell the Bell Laboratories to invent? I mean, So anyway, Charlie said, I'm prepared to recommend to the board that we accept. And then, interestingly enough, he turned to Howard and he said, where do I go? How do I lay down my sword? And Howard said, well, it's not as simple as you think it is, but it can be done. And then he explained, not to get into too much detail, but we were operating under a consent decree signed in 1954. So you had to go back to that court, ask them to vacate that decree, and then take the new decree to the new court and get it approved. So you've got two different judges, and those guys have egos, as it turned out. And anyway, then Charlie turns to me and he said, you have to demonstrate to me, or you have to show me that we can plausibly explain this. Meaning, with all those share owners and all those employees and all those customers affected, you can't just send them a postcard. So is there, can we explain this plausibly? Because we'd been fighting that case, quote, as they say, vigorously, and it had been running for some years. So anyway, that's what he said to me. So he said, Ed, get to your typewriter. In those days, we were still using two typewriters. That dates it for sure. So anyway, that's how the news came to me. I went, we talked a little bit longer, and believe it or not, I went to, you'll recall that we had an apartment in Manhattan on 52nd Street, so I went home. And in the laundry room, I had a little desk and an old Olympia typewriter and a lot of coffee. And so I did it took me about 2 days, I guess. I did the whole plan in how we were going to announce it, how it was to be arranged, how it was to be done, all of the details, and then came back to Charles Brown's office a couple of days later. I worked pretty much night and day because, you know, the biggest fear is a leak.
Sure.
And so anyway, I bring it back to him and I take him through it, and he said, "Okay to me. What's next?" You know, so that's how it unfolded. But if I may, unless you want me to stop talking about this, there are a couple of other.
No, I want you to carry on, but it's curious that one of the most dramatic and important business stories and press releases of all time was written in the laundry room.
On an old German typewriter.
On an old German typewriter. Oh, that's wonderful. Go ahead, tell me some of the lessons.
I didn't have any distractions while I was working on it. Well, what I was going to say, some of the lessons that would be true today, even though that case is history, and the irony, the whole Bell system is put back together again.
Isn't that irony?
In the form of two companies, the new AT&T and Verizon. So, but anyway, one thing I said to Howard in that first meeting, I said, we have to have a joint press conference with the Justice Department. It's very important, and that has to be a condition of this agreement. And what was in my mind, as you would know, and Howard got it, and Charles Brown got it immediately. An announcement like that was going to set off a media frenzy. And so what you want to do is get both sides together at the same time, the same place, and tell the story.
Right. So
that you don't have reporters, you know, we announce it, and then the reporter calls the Justice Department and says AT&T is saying so and so. What do you say to that? And you know that goes on forever. And to get a coherent story out of a zillion reporters, you know, doing that is, you know, you're going to have chaos. So I did say joint press conference. Well, as it turned out, the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust was okay with him. He was by the way, he was a college professor, or had been at Stanford. And so we did have a joint press conference, and that really helped the reporters get the story straight. But it made it possible to tell the story one time, one way, one place, and stick to it. Right. And that's what we did on a Friday afternoon in Washington at the Overseas Press Club. There were about, as I recall, about 110 reporters attended the press conference. And that weekend, as I recall, going from memory, that just in the AT&T PR department, not in the Bell companies, but we fielded 4,000 queries that weekend. Yeah,
4,000.
4,000. So anyway, you know, lesson number one: if you've got a story with that kind of impact, it is just you have to find some way to tell the story one time, one place, or you'll have a train wreck on your hands.
Exactly.
And we were able to do that. I think another lesson, you inferred this earlier, but my boss, Charles Brown, but the whole top management of AT&T and the board of directors, what we were able to do was really a credit to the public relations department, not to me personally, but to the PR department, that we presented a plan to announce that thing to the whole top management, all the CEOs of the Bell companies, to our own board of directors. And you know, thinking back on it later, I thought to myself, that's that's amazing that no one said, you're not going to bring in an agency to do this, or tell me that again, I don't like that, you know, and blah, blah, blah. They all just said, great plan, you know. And that was, so, and the third thing I think, Larry, is, well, I did the plan in 2 days because of the danger of leaks. At least I had an opportunity to think it through. I mean, it didn't come flying in over the transom,
right,
as it so often happens to chief public relations officers, that they don't know till the last minute. I was in on it from the first minute, and that made a huge difference. And we were also able to mobilize not only the chairman of the board as the principal spokesperson, but we were fortunate that we had a president, Bill Ellinghaus, you know him well,
right,
and 2 vice chairs who were, you know, very polished with the news media.
right.
I mean, they were good at it. And so I was able to give them the talking points. And so in fielding those, and by the way, we all lived in our office building through that whole weekend. So it was impressive to a reporter who calls in, and we say, do you want to talk to Charlie Brown? Hang on a minute. Press the button.
Right.
He's on the line. And Bill Ellinghaus and whatnot. So we had 4 really good authoritative spokesmen, and of course all the rest of us ink-stained wretches in the PR department who could, you know, who could handle whatever came in. And we did augment our media relations group by handpicking people elsewhere, and who might have been on jobs elsewhere in the public relations department, but had plenty of experience. So we were able to get through that weekend. The last thing, in anticipating this train wreck or this media frenzy, I wrote an ad, a full-page ad, to run in the morning papers the next day, all the metropolitan papers in the United States. And I did that for fear that the story would not come out as clearly and as accurately as it did. And we hired different financial print shops in New York City and gave them each a paragraph or 2 of the ad, so no one ever saw
Put it together.
the whole ad. And then we had individuals get on airplanes and fly out to the markets and deliver the ad to the newspapers. Well, it turned out the reporters got it right and got it straight, and that really was superfluous. The other thing that I think we did, maybe not everybody who will ever listen to this will have the same thing, but in a company that has a lot of different divisions and business units and whatnot, we called the presidents of the Bell companies into New York, or New Jersey actually, and I took them through the plan, and Howard Treenham took them through the steps in the courthouse, and I asked each of them, as soon as we had made the announcement, to have their own press conference in their headquarters city, because they had the employees. They were theirs, not ours.
Sure.
They had the customers. They were not AT&T headquarters customers. They were the Bell companies. And with but one exception, not one of those CEOs freelanced or made a boo-boo. I sent them a packet by courier the night before with everything they needed for a press conference, and they had the conferences I think noon the next day. And that helped a lot because they were talking to their customers, they were talking to their employees,
Right.
and they were talking to the news media that covered their company. And I think that sometimes we forget to do, I don't know whether it was me who thought of that or somebody else, but sometimes we forget thinking, well, the whole show is the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
Well, it's not.
It isn't.
If you're a big company with a lot of people scattered all over the place, employees and customers, it's important to have the person they look to as the head guy, you know, not the chairman of the board of the holding company. So,
Ed, from that point, how long did it take for the breakup to become operational?
well, the judge, believe it or not, I mean, the judge in the court where the antitrust case was conducted, he gave us 18 months to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, again, Charles Brown, whose belief was that we can do this, and the sooner the better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the decision is made, don't drag it out.
Right.
And the judge also said, this is another funny story. He said, this is the judge in Washington, he said, you have 6 months left to use the logo
Oh.
and the Bell name, and it's gone. And you see, we never, we always spoke in terms of the Bell company or a particular Bell company. I mean, our whole communication, I mean, strategy was not AT&T. So unless you were a share owner, you didn't know very much about AT&T,
Right.
because we advertised as the Bell telephone system, and they, all had the same logo. So the judge, anyway, says 6 months, and so I blew up to our general counsel, not to the judge, and I said, "That's crazy. I mean, we own that logo. It's owned by AT&T. It has been from day one. What does he mean, telling us we can't use it anymore?" And so, anyway, so Howard and I went down and talked to the assistant, the Justice Department, high command, and they were dubious about it, but they said, "Okay, we'll join you in a petition if that's the way you feel," and asked the judge to reverse himself. Mm-hmm. Took him about 10 seconds to read that petition and say, "That's the way it's going to be. Yeah. You don't have a logo." So we scrambled around. I won't get into the details of it but our design firm was out in Los Angeles that did our, identity stuff. And so we told them we had to have a new logo, and we discussed it with them on the phone. And they flew into New York on a Sunday afternoon, and I had rented a hotel suite because I didn't want to do this in the office where that kind of stuff lands in garbage cans and you find it on the front page of the New York Times the next day. So anyway, so we were in this hotel room, and we were crawling around on our hands and knees, pushing layouts around on the floor. and the Bell that the new AT&T has modified it somewhat, but that Bell is what emerged from our crawling around the floor.
Really?
And somebody asked me, "Well, why do you like that?" And I said, "Well, it strikes me," this is giving away my age again, but I said, "It strikes me that it's durable. It looks like a guy in a blue blazer with gray pants, and it'd probably be in style for a while,
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the deal there. But 18 months to get the complete job done, and
How many companies were there, Bell companies that?
well, there were 26 Bell telephone companies plus a manufacturing company, plus which was Western Electric
Right.
in those days.
Bell Labs.
And Bell Labs, and of course each of those companies had subsidiary companies.
Right.
So,
Right.
but the gang, the people, the top of each of those pyramids was a Bell company, except for Western Electric.
And that's absolutely great business history, told by someone who had a critical role. And I now want to take you to the formation of, well, let's talk a little about Arthur Page.
Okay. Before you get to that, one last thing.
Yeah.
If there's anyone watching this who's crazy enough to want to know more of the details about the breakup, there's two terrific books. One by Steve Call. I think the book is titled Last Call, I think. Steve Call, who was then with the Wall Street Journal, but he did not cover us, but he undertook that book, and it's great. And the other one is a scholarly book by two professors, one at Johns Hopkins and one at, I believe, the management school at MIT. And I believe that one is called The End of the Bell System or something like that.
Both good books.
Excellent books, and they're widely available in libraries,
Good.
so I just wanted to throw that in.